Everything you know about Star Wars is wrong. In this episode, Jango and Boba Fett are not Mandalorians. Choco, with your lightsaber, explain why this is such a contentious topic.
Yeah, this is something. Well, it's so contentious because it was such a big deal in the expanded universe, right? Boba Fett was the was what they created Mandalorian culture based off of. There was a lot of stuff in the expanded, like Boba ends up becoming Mandalore at one point in time. You know, also we have Open Season's fantastic comic if you haven't read it yet, as far as origins. But the expanded universe isn't canon, and George. I don't know why George crapped all over that constantly, to the point where Karen Travis couldn't finish her book series because the lore was so broken for what she was trying to do at that point, that yeah, her series is just done. But yeah, we can't take a position that doesn't exist, right? So in order to say he is a Mandalorian, you know, we have to prove it, you know. And there's nothing that we have that proves it.
What do we have?
As far as proof, as far as things that would suggest he is a Mandalorian.
Well, I mean, I think holistically we should probably outline what we do have in lore. So, you know, I'll start. For one, we do have that Almec says he's just a random bounty hunter and he doesn't know where he got the armor, which, of course, could be just hearsay or bias and a lie.
Which it could be,
yes.
unless the behind the scenes for that episode has them explicitly say that George Lucas made us put this in there to show that he's not a Mandalorian. But lore can change. However, currently the only Jango Fett canon comic is the Age of Republic Jango Fett, in which in the back of that comic it also explicitly states that he's not a Mandalorian. We also have the show The Mandalorian with Boba Fett's armor, and in order to get the armor back, all Boba Fett would have to tell Din is that he's a Mandalorian, and he would give it back, right? The whole reason Din took it was because people, after the Purge, people had been taking Mandalorian armor, and it didn't belong to them, right? And if he actually, so what Boba Fett did instead is show that I have a legitimate, I'm not a Mandalorian, but I have a claim to the armor. This belonged to my father. We saw the chain code. Now, the chain code hints at Jaster Muriel, which hints at Open Seasons, which leads people to believe that, oh, does that mean Open Seasons is canon? No, it doesn't make anything in that canon.
So let's talk about what this actually means in the grand scope of the lore of Mandalorians. The chain code pointing to Jaster Muriel obviously points to the fact that Jaster Muriel was in fact a Mandalorian. It also points to Jango Fett being a foundling. And there's something very, very explicit we have to point out, is that being a foundling does not make you a Mandalorian. Grogu is a foundling because he is found by a Mandalorian, and they remain a foundling, and this is according to the Armorer's lore, that once they come of age and take the creed, they then become a Mandalorian, and Grogu has undergone those rites. So Mandalorian and Grogu are both Mandalorians by creed. We also have true Mandalorians by birthright who undergo the rite of passage in the living waters of Mandalore themselves, like Bo-Katan and anyone born on Mandalore, and including Din, who was by every sense of the Armorer's creed no longer a Mandalorian, but he went through the rites on the planet itself to reclaim that heritage. So he is by the creed of the home planet themselves, is Mandalorian and can in fact remove his helmet at this point. But I think the Armorer has
Also,
already conceded the helmet part already.
In addition, I mean, they explicitly say Grogu is no longer a foundling when he officially becomes a Mandalorian.
Yes.
And I think that's an important distinction to make. And we have other characters with similar situations, right? I can point to Asajj Ventress. Is Asajj Ventress a Jedi? No. She's not a Jedi. She was raised by a Jedi. She was raised in the Jedi art. She was found by Kainarek. He trained her and all this stuff. She never became a Jedi, but she can still use all those skills that she built up. And so like, we have all those outside information, but what about the other side? What about internal? At what point does Boba or Jango ever in canon refer to themselves as a Mandalorian? Say that they are Mandalorian, say that they stand for Mandalore, show any interest in the Mandalorian culture, show any interest in reclaiming the planet Mandalore. Like every other Mandalorian you will ever see, that's half of what they talk about as being a Mandalorian. That's all Bo-Katan talks about. That's all Satine talked about. You have that's all they talk about.
It's how Paz Vizsla like literally rolled. He was like, "Why do we live?" Like, the question was, "Why do we fight?" And his answer was, "Because we are Mandalorians." But I feel like Paz could just wake up one day and be like, "Why do we breathe?" Because we are Mandalorians.
And then you have Boba Fett finally finding a place where he belonged, like a family, with the Tuskens. Why did he do that with Mandalorians? Or had he never had that with Mandalorians?
Yeah. We also have an explicit question being asked of Boba Fett to begin with, right? It's Din asking him, "Are you Mandalorian?" Silence on his part was telling, and then he said, "Did you take the creed?" And Boba Fett said, "I'm just a simple man." Or wait, what does he say?
That's when he says, "I follow no creed but my own."
Yeah.
Which is also saying I'm not a Mandalorian because I don't follow them.
Very true.
Now, of course, an argument can be made that Jango at one point, because all we know explicitly that Jango was a foundling. What we don't know is whether he took the creed at one point or another. We just know that he was a bounty hunter by the time we met him. We also know that Boba Fett does not identify as a Mandalorian, nor does he care about the planet. Like, when he's asked about the planet by I forget her, Casca Reeves. She says, well, they were talking about the planet Mandalorian. They were talking about their mission to reclaim it. And Boba Fett says that planet that's been glassed, why do you care so much about it? So already from an internal perspective, Boba doesn't care about Mandalore. He doesn't really follow the creed. And so that kind of...
There's also a similar exchange in Book of Boba Fett when Din Djarin joins him, and he's like, "You're gonna die trying to live by that creed."
Yeah. And so, for the most part, I think Boba Fett explicitly makes it very clear he's not a Mandalorian, and he doesn't subscribe to the creed, nor does he care about the planet or the culture. In Jango's case, you could say at some point he may have taken the creed, but just as we've established, until that is explicitly said, we cannot assume a position that doesn't exist.
And one other small little caveat to add is his chain code called him a foundling.
Yeah.
But you are no longer a foundling. Like if Din had a kid, that kid would be a Mandalorian because Din is a Mandalorian, right? Why would the chain code call him a foundling still if it's adult armor?
Yeah.
I mean,
Very
so
good point.
that portion is my speculation. But yeah, it's entirely possible. Now, my headcanon, and I'm curious what your guys' headcanon is that makes it all work. My headcanon is just this. He was found by Jasper Real, was raised in the culture of Mandalorian, and when the Mandalorian Civil War broke out, he came to back Jaster, the person who raised him, and ended up inheriting his armor. Never became Mandalorian, never took the creed. That would easily explain everything.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jake.
Oh no, it's good. I was gonna say, kind of on a related note, I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind is, like you said, Choco, like when Boba Fett was created as a character, that was like Mandalorian culture, because we really didn't know a lot about it until like the comics and the expanded universe and stuff like that started coming around. So Boba Fett in a lot of ways was like the OG Mandalorian in a way.
Yeah.
But as we kind of moved on, like I think is like, in terms of them specifically as characters, I really like the idea of them not being a Mandalorian or connected really to that, because something that I really loved about the Book of Boba Fett, and I love that show, I really do. I know I'm just coming in with like all the hot takes today between this and like Rise of Skywalker, but I really do love it. I really enjoyed it a lot. One of my favorite things about it was that Boba Fett's, he actually becomes a character for once. He has a character arc of learning that just because he's wearing his father's armor and his father was connected to bounty hunting and all of these things, that armor doesn't define him. He can take that armor and make whatever he wants it to be, because he can forge his own destiny, right? And he is kind of like the person that's wearing that armor and here on out, blah, 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 blah. Like, that's the point of the show in a lot of ways. And I think that them being like, that armor being tied specifically back to like OG Mandalorian ties, I really like the idea of Jango Fett not being a Mandalorian and yet having that armor because he was like taken in and stuff. And then Jango made that armor and used it for like bounty hunting and stuff. I really think it makes Boba Fett's arc in that show a lot stronger, in my opinion, if it's not tied to that. I don't know if that makes sense or not. That's just kind of how I see it.
I mean, and I would also say the inverse is true for me, at least. If they were Mandalorians, it makes them worse characters, because they don't care about Mandalore or other Mandalorians.
It would make them the worst Mandalorians.
Yeah.
But I think
they just don't care about the planet at all. It's so funny.
But I think it's also a detriment to their character, because that's not why people fell in love with them, right? Going from Return, like Empire, to Return to the prequels, people loved their characters because of their characters. They were bounty hunters, they were truly lethal fighters, and back then there was no Mandalorians at all until the EU expanded that lore. But then when George kind of ran a steamroller over all of that lore, it really did kind of made them individuals. It made Jango Fett and Boba Fett their own, and it is by all merits something that is something that they own, and to describe them as Mandalorians despite their own personal feelings on the culture and the planet is a disservice to just them and their personal wishes.
I agree.
So again, I think the lore that they come out with from here on out, should they claim that Jango at some point took the creed, we would still also have to say, but he is not a Mandalorian anymore, right?
Yeah.
Because he left and became a bounty hunter, and that's it. We would have to change our position to he once was. So that's about as charitable as we can get with this discussion.